Robinson here. Some of you know me as Wayland the Smith. I've been involved in the reenactment movement here in Australia on and off for 30 odd years. I was instrumental with the Harris brothers, Ralph Greenley, a few others, in forming the Ancient and Medieval Martial Arts Society in Sydney back in 1971. And people laughed at us in those days, but today it's quite a widespread movement, worldwide in fact. A lot of the popularity and interest is due to the what you might call archaeology by reenactment. It's sort of made it respectable. A lot of water's passed under the bridge since those days, and of course as we all get older we've got to hang up the hauberk and do less physical things. So I'm putting together some videos to show you a bit of the history of the movement, but also this particular video to show you how people in the Dark Ages and the Iron Age had to go to such great lengths to obtain the metal to make their armour and weapons from, because you couldn't go down to a Mitre 10 or anywhere and buy metal over the counter. True, there were trade bars, there was trading in metals, but it wasn't very widespread. There had to be home production of iron from native iron ores. They may well have mixed it, and often did mix it with other metal that they had obtained by trade, and sometimes used meteoric iron also. The Egyptians particularly started using meteoric iron very early. So I want you to have a look at this film where we're going to call on my alter ego, the Odinic shaman, to part the mists of time and travel through the web of the Norns, the three fates, the Parte, to have a look into the past and see how man might have done this. It may not be 100% correct, but it's fairly close, and I hope you'll gather from this. And we'd like to see people doing this sort of thing, reenacting the technology as well as the drinking and the good times. I mean, there was more to medieval life than the mead horn, and more to medieval life than the mail shirt and the sword. So, hope you enjoy this, and I hope it spurs you all on to greater effort. Great old Father, shall you reveal all? We must see beyond the web of the Norns. We must reveal all. Odin. Odin. Iron has been worked for thousands of years, and in the dim mists of time we do not know exactly who were the first to work it. Certainly by the Roman Iron Age it was well established as the magic metal, far superior to the earlier bronze. In the dim mists of time, smiths would work to produce small quantities of iron, laboriously and arduously formed into tools and weapons that gave one tribe superiority over the other. And from these humble beginnings began our civilization today, which is totally dependent on and could not exist without the magic metal iron. So arduous. The Romans, who fought regularly against the Gauls, were both civilizations dependent upon and great users of iron. The
the Germanic, Nordic, Anglo-Saxon types may well have mined and smelted some of the much desired metal iron. Iron was frequently mined in shallow bell pits, often what they call clay band ores, sometimes in sand. They would mine for nodules of ore, which were small lumps of ore that had been deposited over the centuries. The most common ore they would use would be bog iron ore, obtained from lakes, swamps. This was deposited by bacterial action. The reaction would deposit a metallic iron out of iron-bearing waters. Also, some magnetic iron sand was used. The scale of mining was very small, and there would be much labour involved even obtaining half a hundredweight of ore. And yet, when one looks at the quantities of iron used, the labour was not inconsiderable, for there were thousands and thousands of men wearing armour, using tools, using swords. So all that iron had to come from somewhere. So we must think of our ancestors and the hard labour that they had to indulge in.
Whoa. Ah. Cut. Oh. Oh. Yeah. Oh.
Using fairly primitive equipment, wooden shovels with an iron edge and simple picks, hardly changed actually from our today's miners' picks. Using these simple tools, the Dark Age man mined the requisite ore for his iron manufacturing.
Cut. Now.
These small nodules of ore. Another source of ores was magnetic sands, such as were found in rivers and lake beds, and are often used, or were used by Africans to obtain a high quality ore. Some of these magnetites are up to 70% iron. The average would be about 50 or 60% iron. It varies considerably. These were panned for, much like gold was in the old days. The next job to be done, of course, would be making the furnace. For this, a clay would be required, preferably a refractory clay to withstand the high temperatures. Whatever clay was available was usually pressed into surface. A rough rule of thumb would be that the whiter the clay, the more refractory it would tend to be. These clays would be usually excavated from river banks, possibly in a wet state, sometimes dry and then puddled up to the right consistency. The technique varied. The end result was much the same. Next came the puddling process where the clay was mixed with water. Until it reached the required consistency. The clay then would be transported to the site where the bowl hearth would be constructed. Usually this would be a shallow bowl, not quite 30 centimetres across, 9 inches or 10 inches in the old scale, with a clay cone or dome on top of it, a fire clay lining, and a fire clay 2-year or air pipe coming in from where the bellows would be fitted. And quite often a slag hole would be left in one side, which would be temporarily blocked, of course, and only open towards the end of the smelt.
Oh, mate.
What?
Yeah. The idea of the clay cone or dome would be to keep in as much carbon monoxide gas.
I'll smell hund.
Dogs in trouble.
Hund.
Because all this was done. And once completed, this would be allowed to dry. The bellows, these varied considerably from period to period and time to time, because some areas used clay bowl with a leather sort of top on it, which is flexible. But this type of double bellows was very common throughout Germanic and Nordic areas, and is often illustrated in various illustrations. Some stave churches have good illustrations of it. And there we are looking down the inside of the bowl hearth with its clay dome, which will now be allowed to dry in preparation for the slag hole at the side, which will be sealed temporarily later on. Here we have some of the hematite type iron ore that has been crushed. Although quite frequently, as I said, other ores were used, bauxite, hematites and other such ores. And on the due and appointed day, the smith proceeds to his furnace to prepare for the day's labours and his smelting. Here he is accompanied by his good wife. We must presume that the sons are out at the wars or have gone a Viking. Not unknown for women to help in such matters, particularly in Iceland where there are men who are not very common. That is to say, not very numerous. Small population. So a small fire could be kindled, usually with some straw as tinder and then some twigs.
Good.
A good fire going, upon which the charcoal fuel could be put. Now, on this frosty morning, our smith prepares.
Good.
Having lit the fire, he would then presume to pump the bellows and build up a good heat bank. charcoal would be in place.
That's good to see. Right, yeah. Just check it.
Charcoal pieces would be poured on top of the small wood fire and gradually brought up to temperature.
No, yet, no. Okay. Yeah.
This is, of course, where 6 strong suns would come in handy. And of course, the good wife would lend a hand at times when the husband needed to do something. Perhaps relieve himself. It was always a job for more than one person.
Oh, yeah, good. Good. Yeah. Archwell hound. Yeah. Sprinkle a bit. Charcoal. Yeah.
In the foreground can be seen the small block-type anvil that was common throughout the early Dark Ages. This type of anvil rarely weighed more than a few kilograms, but was quite adequate for the purpose, and they could do some very good work upon that.
Odin. Thor.
Yes, you could certainly get Thor doing that for several days.
You're going to turn it off. Yeah, good.
Of course, there again the good woman would lend a hand. So I think she's making hard work of this.
Yeah. Okay.
Action! Yeah, good, iron. Dagger. Now, go get the other little camera and I'll set that up for you to get some shots.
Ever faithful wench, pumping iron. It's a whole new meaning in the phrase pumping iron. There we're sifting the excess ash from the charcoal because it has been found, scientifically proven, that ore that is smelted with charcoal, with the bark left on and the resulting ash, has a freer flowing slag than charcoal made from wood that has not had the bark. Because with the bit of ash there, it makes it rather messy. So for thousands of years, this is how man produced. Periodically through the smelt, an iron bar would be used to loosen up any fuel that might be clogging the stoke hole at the top of the mound, and so that it would settle down better. And of course, the rural setting was typical of farm life in those days, where nearly all farmsteads had a smithy and many produced their own iron. Also, the tap hole would be checked towards the end of the smelt to see if any slag was running, which would give the smith an indication of the presence of a bloom. It could often be felt actually by probing through that hole. If you left it open all the time though, you would get a certain amount of leakage of air draft, so it was usually clogged with a rock or some clay. In this case you can see some slag that has actually flowed and then solidified. A shot of this like that. And here the trusty crew are nearing the end of the smelt.
No, nine.
After 6 hours of graft, starting at 8 a.m. in the morning. It's now just after 2 p.m.
Yeah.
And experimental blooms show that 5 to 8 hours will produce a reasonable bloom. Would be fairly typical. 6 hours is a sort of good average.
Yeah.
Now, of course, what would have to be done is when the smith was satisfied there was a bloom, here he's removing the bellows, when he was satisfied there was a bloom inside, he would break open the bowl half to extract it. And this, of course, was the big drawback to this procedure. In later years, other systems were developed where this was not necessary. But in the case of a bowl half with a dome, which was fairly efficient because the cone or dome on top increased the amount of carbon monoxide present, which aids in the reduction process of the iron ore to metallic iron. This had to be destroyed, of course, to get the iron out, which, when labour was cheap and simple, or plentiful, the cost was immaterial, really. Because if there was plenty of clay and plenty of people to rebuild them, I suppose they just build another one. There's a tremendous heat bank there, where you've got temperatures of up around 1100 degrees, and the sort of thing you have to be very careful with, actually.
Ah. Ah.
This bloom would be fairly typical of most dark age ones, weighing in at around 20 or so kilograms, which is, no sorry, 5 kilograms. Us oldies don't handle the metrics too well. About 10 pounds of iron, a few pounds of slag, so about 5 or 6 kilograms of iron would have resulted, which is typical of excavated.
Hey, bloom! Hey, Mudgee!
That's it.
That's it. Das is iron. Ja. Oh, gras goed. Das is the iron.
The iron, of course, then has to be vigorously worked to squeeze the excess slag. And this is where the word wrought iron comes from. Wrought means worked or hammered, you see. This was only the first stage in a long stage of producing a usable artefact. Here the smith is testing a small sample of the bloom to see if it squishes down into a solid iron, which it has. It must be reworked at a fairly high temperature, but this rough test gave him an idea. And it was metallic, and this will be proven.
Gras goed. Himmel. Try and break it into pieces.
And here we have the bloom.
Get the slag off. That inner shit should be solid iron. You can hear it ringing. Eh? There we have it. Yep. Hear it? That is not just slag. Anyway, 6 hours smelting, about 25 pound of magnetic iron ore, about 100 weight or so of charcoal, fair bit of puffing and puffing, and that hopefully will be reworked down into some usable artefact at a later date. Cut.
And there we have the iron bloom cleaned up the following day. And you can see where we've separated most of the rough slag and clay from this. We're now going to test it with a magnet and the grinding test, which are classical tests. First we'll weigh it. Here we have approximately 3 kilograms or 6 pounds of iron. About 6 pounds of iron there. Another piece there. And we're going up a bit there. What have we got? Now, there we have another 3 pounds and 1.5. So we're getting about 8 or 9 pounds. There's a little magnet on a hammer, you see, a little round magnet. Now, this then, when applied to some of the tested pieces that we lightly forged, you can see it adheres. There it is adhering. So this proves conclusively that it is metallic, because slag obviously won't attract a magnet. And here we have the spark test, which is another metallurgical test, and you can clearly see there, see quite clearly the sparks, which prove that it is metallic iron. There we are. And you'll actually be able to, yes, you can see quite clearly the shiny surface coming up. So that is metallic iron beyond a doubt, which will later be reworked into small pieces. There we have metallic iron, no trouble at all. We'll check a few other pieces of the bloom, just to be sure. And there we have it. Now there's our bloom, ready to be reworked. This of course will need considerable working to make it into a usable metal, but this was the basic process common to Iron Age and Dark Age man in Europe and in Africa until quite recently in parts of the Near and Far East. And without that iron we wouldn't have had much of a civilization, you see.
Needs a lot of refining.
And this is how much work.
Turn that into something useful in another day's work.
And here we have a schematic of an Iron Age furnace or early Dark Age furnace, single bellows with a slag hole at the side and that domed construction. They also were furnaces made, however, with two bellows inlets. This was done at Armidale recently. I'll show you some footage. Here we have the footage of a smelt that was done at Armidale Gathering in 2002. There's Rodney Chapper, one of our local chaps here from Mudgee, helping out. There were NEMAS guys, quite a number of guys from various clubs worked on this project, and they achieved a usable quantity of iron. They used my bellows there, another set, to have a double bellows system. Mick Parker very kindly allowed us to use some of his footage, and here we have the markers. So you can see how the double bellows setup works, and so it's very kind of Mick Parker. Here we have a reenactment of an early Iron Age smithing hearth. This was done as an experimental thing in Europe some years ago. And here we have a Zulu blacksmithing setup, very common all through Africa, double bellows there. It's very small hearth, simple types of tools. And here also is another African one. You can see the goatskin bag type bellows there. Here we have in Zimbabwe or Rhodesia a cone type smelting furnace. These types of smelting furnaces are very common. Here also in the Far East we have Dyax smelting and working iron using bamboo tubes with tufts of feathers. I've actually seen them using these, and they work quite effectively. Here's a close-up of them using stone anvils and stone hammers, because the iron is so precious, you see. They make their krisses and other blades out of these. And here's the Haya, an African tribe who was smelting carbon steel at the time of the Romans. You can see quite a large setup there, so that it's possible to achieve very good results with simple equipment. Here we have the Viking blacksmiths. This is from a stave church in Scandinavia. You can see the double bellows set up there. A small block anvil. And this is the sort of equipment that you can use yourself to replicate the work that was done. Regan the smith and the sword. Here we have some actual excavated examples from various Scandinavian graves. You can see the small block anvils, the hammer, the tongs, virtually no different to today's. Some small block anvils from the Mastermeyer find. These are quite small, but they're adequate for the work that they needed to do. Small bick iron, this socket end would be used for forming tubes or spear sockets upon. That end there would be driven into the log. A pair of tongs, a pair of shears. In essence, no different to today's, a pair of tongs again. As I as I say, it's the technique that hasn't changed for thousands of years. Some hammers ranging from almost a sledgehammer down to quite small hammers there. Very similar to today's smithing hammers, very similar. A hacksaw, the hacksaw blade used for cutting a slot in a spring there, a lock spring. Would have had a wooden handle, of course. Here we have another collection of tools. This is, I think, the matongs, sledges, all the other tools. These are from books, of course. But it'll give you an indication of how simple the equipment was that they had, and yet they were able to do some really brilliant work with it. Here, some rare footage in the 1930s of African smiths at work in South Africa or Kenya, one of the two. And you can see they're working with fairly basic sort of a setup there. Goatskin bag bellows, stone anvil and a rock for a sledgehammer, although they had smaller hand hammers. Bloke saying, he said, I want these spears fixed by tomorrow afternoon. Obviously he's one of the impi, one of the warriors. Oh, better start working hard. Now there you go, that's how it was done in the old days. And you can do it too. There's optional. And even within the last few years, some African tribes are still, some tribes are still making their own iron. Here's a recent documentary. This is a magnetite black sand like I used in my smelt. Panned out of the river much like gold.
At the bottom of the calabash, a few dark grains appear through the white sand. The catch is minimal. The women are about to bring back to the village a few handfuls of iron ore. Old for the matakam.
That would probably be a magnetite sand, magnetic iron ore, fairly high quality.
Dalimano is the blacksmith in Mabase and one of the most important men in the tribe. He believes the ore brought home by his wife is of good quality. As if it was a treasure, he hides it in his room, safe from thieves or bad spirits. Dalimano is the last of the original blacksmiths of northern Cameroon, the last guardian of a unique tradition passed down by his ancestors, but now unknown to the next generation. On a hill above Mabase, hidden between the rocks, Dalimano's furnace is almost sacred. Children are not allowed to come and play. Only Dalimano and his helpers go near it. Anyway, they are the only ones who know how to use it.
Goatskin bag bellows there. Clay pots with goatskin bags on the top middle stick.
A hot air vent and bellows. Charcoal and elbow grease to tease the fire. The knowledge is thousands of years old. Tribes of Central Africa used the same kind of furnaces 4,000 years ago. This one was here long before Dalimano, his father and grandfather, and no one remembers who built it. Dalimano will probably be the last one ever to use it. For hours, the men take turns to blow on the embers, bringing the iron ore up to the right temperature. It must be 1500 degrees centigrade in order to melt.
There's a bloom. Looks like shit, but there we have a bloom of direct reduced iron ore.
Bertemu, benar. Bertemu dengan Sarah bertena. Usaha ina. Magla ka kedasan dari kakang kana Sarah. Yo aksib ngander kubita tawa aksib ngander kulib zindinan terkashe.
The closest town is only 15 kilometres away, and the local blacksmiths now work with recycled iron, the iron of the white man, as Dalimano likes to say. It's very cheap and demands a lot less effort. It's ironic considering how precious iron used to be here.
Currency bars were used all over the ancient world. They found them in pre-Roman Celtic periods. Certainly in the medieval days, iron was a currency bars.
Of the Matakam people. He is the only one able to extract the iron from the ore, and the only one entitled to. Now a craftsman from another village has come to transform the block just out of the furnace. Today, a farmer from Mabase ordered a small tool, so the blacksmiths go to work. The metal is heated again before being forged, cleaned and refined. A shape slowly emerges. Traditional outfits, the men in warrior dress and the women almost naked, with only an iron belt to cover their pubic area.
The idea of these iron belts was a form of currency, of wealth, obviously, because back in the old days, iron being used as currency was as good as gold.
Meaning senata bimabe al damini ko godu mai bana handi dugo kaji mini habata tamini dambi ngare dam godo mini habata bimat mini etata kundido kundi poima lumo.
100 years ago, the Matakam people resisted Islam and chose to remain animist. 40 years ago, they opposed a tyrannical Cameroon government. Today, they no longer have an enemy, but they are still prepared to live life their way.
This is very like a Catalan hearth, as they call it, which was used in Europe. And so, on another day, our Dark Age smith would go to his smithy, usually a separate building away from the long hall and the barn, etc., and begin the arduous task of converting the blooms into usable metal. Quite often this would be a team work, probably sons and whatever, helping the slaves, help. They're all away at the wars at the moment, I think. Tending his fire, he brings it up to a working heat. he sorts through the pieces of bloom to see which
We
look
are.
best for the purpose.
Hmm.
And the bloom will have to be worked at quite a high heat to squeeze the slag out. He's going to test a piece now to see if he's got it up to the required heat.
Not hot enough yet. No. It's all right to you young fellas living in the 10th century or what have you, but us old blokes with arthritis can't bellows. I'm sorry, unless I can get a truckload of volunteers to do it, I'm going to have to cheat and go back to the good old electric blower here. So, anyway, we'll chuck a bit of this bloom in and see what we can get out of it, eh? As I say, there's a fair bit of slag in it. Didn't slag out too well, but we'll give trusted magician's assistant here. Here's some flat plates. You can, if you notice you can actually see the progression from the spongy bloom to metal. And that's just by heating it up to a high heat and squishing it down. You can see the shine on it, the metal. Now that's metallic iron. Now they can be forge welded together. There's almost enough there. It's something you'd have to do to understand that it goes squishy, right? You'll feel it as though you're squashing dough or something. It's you know, because the irons go squish, the slag will just shatter. As I say, I'm no expert. I've only done this a few times, maybe I don't know, 8 or 10 or something like that over the last 30 years. We did some smelting at Isis Street at Reenactment with KWMAS in about the mid-70s. I've done some at Macquarie University and a couple here, and they did some at Armadale. So. Okay, so we can squish that down a bit better. See, it's soft and it's pasty. See, it's still crumbling a little bit. Maybe not quite hot enough. But that doesn't matter because, bugger. Anyway, you might say, oh, that looks like rubbish. But that, because of the feel of it, I know, is metallic iron. It'll need reworking. What I'll do is I'll take the other cakes and flakes I've got, pile them together with a bit of other scrap iron, because it was very common in those days to put some of your local rough iron together with either meteoric iron, scrap iron from somewhere else, imported merchant bars, what have you. So from such rough looking rubbish, they would make things. It's just an acquired sort of skill. So we'll let that one cool down and we'll check it in a minute when it cools right down. I've got a merchant bar here, which we had imported by camel train from the Rhineland, via Baluchistan. We swapped female slaves, all sorts of things, for this iron bar, because good iron was very precious in those days. Anyway, enough rubbish. I'll show you what I'm going to do when we get flattened out. Now, in the past, I found the best way to turn this into better metal is to sandwich it, right? So, what they used to do, and this is how the principle of pattern welding and samurai swords and all that stuff evolved. You'd take a thin bar of iron and you put your sandwich, your other stuff in between, like that. That holds it in place. Later on we'll fold it again and put the next one in and build it up and build it up. So you end up with about 75 or 80% of your iron and the rest of the wrought iron, you know? Now we're going to bring that up to a good welding heat. Oh, look at that, a lovely high welding heat. Right, flows all that's necessary. Ho! Blacksmith's fleas, they call them. Now we can really squish. A lot of that's the slag coming out of the silica. See, because the slag in wrought iron is just silicon. Just flatten it out a bit more and I'll fold some more in it. Right. You have to. Well, there we have the blacksmith's fleas coming off, the sparklers. Okay, now we come down here. And again you can feel it. You can feel the iron. You can see the slag bubbling out. And you can feel the piece of flume. See the bits of slag burning there? Look. Slag, bit of charcoal probably trapped in there, on the edge there. Okay? Now that's becoming, whoops, clumsy dick. So, I suppose, what, a third of that now is home brewed iron. And I can just keep repeating that process. You'd end up with probably 90% of your own iron if I kept breaking that other stuff down. But I want to keep some samples so I won't take it too far. But I think we've proved the technique, right? Well, I mean, for thousands of years it's how it was done, and we've seen how the Africans did it, and I've actually seen them myself doing it years ago. So, there's no great mystery in making iron, or even working iron. So there's no reason for all you medievalists out there not to be banging out pattern welded swords. Pattern welding is pretty easy actually. It's what they call Damascus. Damascus is just pattern welding and pattern welding is Damascus. All you need is bundles of soft iron rods, which you can make yourself or scones off tips, some carbon steel to mix with it, or you make your own carbon steel by carburization or case hardening. So there's no mystery in any of it. I mean, obviously, you're not going to spend weeks and months making a pattern welded sword to smash it up at the next Armadale or the next convention, are you? But, you know, it's an achievement. It's an achievement. Say, well, we're done. And it also says, we're as good as our ancestors ever were. Well, close on it anyway. That's coming up with a nice old weld there. A lot of people say, what's the mystery in forge welding? No mystery. Heat. That's all. Learning to judge it. Oh, there we are. Look at that. blacksmith's pleased. So that now, I might fold that another day and put another bit into it, so on and so forth. You see that bloom is all squished. Oh yes, nice. That'll get the slag out of it. Oh, you can feel it going now. Show up, but you can see, I can see anyway, where the wrought iron has worked into the other wrought iron. So we've got two lots of wrought iron. You can see it quite, I can see it quite clearly in there, but I don't know if it'll show up on the video. So we'd say that section there is at least now over half, and when we flatten that out, we'll cut that other section off there, and Bob's your own. And there we are. If you look carefully, you can see the squished down homebrewed wrought in the centre of that folded piece there. There's several layers that we did, and if you look at the bottom, there's a little magnet was on the piece there. So there's some pieces of bloom and metallic iron in the centre. Because it was sort of fragmentary, I had to do it that way. An expert would probably have the whole bloom to work with. We're back at Isis Street in Wahroonga. There's another view of it there. And we made a few hundredweight of charcoal for a... This is taken off an old black and white photograph. There's yours truly operating the pit stead. Still had all my hair in them days. There's John Harris, another of the co-founders of AMAS. There's a small bowl hearth there. We had using vacuum cleaners as blowers, of course, but it worked out all right. We got a result. Not perfect, but it, you know, there's me chucking in a bit of charcoal. Now back in 1981, some of the university students I was working with from Macquarie Uni went down to Mittagong and mined some of the bog iron ore from down there, which we washed and then roasted, sieved it. Then we built a little bowl hearth with a dome cover, much the same as you just seen, and we proceeded to smelt a bloom. A little bit bigger than the ones we did here, and we got a bit of usable iron out of it, which because it was a better quality ore too, it was well, not hematite, it was limonite. Anyway, we worked that ore and we mixed that together in the same way with a bit of colonial wrought iron, and we cut that bar up into several pieces, laminated it up with some other iron, and made a twist, a laminated twist. There's the right hand one, the left hand one, you see. That's to be the core of a pattern welded sword. Along the lines of the Nidam swords, the university was funding it, but not very much, so we couldn't get too elaborate. They were welded together, then a piece of harder steel was shaped up, a groove put in the core piece, and then that was shaped into it and welded into it, so that you had the soft pattern welded core surrounded by a hard steel. There's the rough blank being forged out, and the aid of some of the university students there, one of them, Greg House, they're helping me, but different ones helping me. There's the nearly completed blade. This was then heat treated, although a lot of them weren't heat treated in those days, but we heat treated this one because some were, and this was then quenched in a brine solution. And then it was etched with hydrochloric or muriatic acid, it's sometimes called, to bring up the pattern. You can just make out a bit of the patterning in the blade along the fuller, that is the centre groove there. As you can see, the chevron patterning to a degree there. It wasn't a brilliant pattern, but it was a pattern and it worked. That gives you an idea there. And there's the completed sword with a companion dagger that we made. You can just make out the patterning. That's now at Macquarie University as part of their teaching aids for the history and linguistics. And there's another pattern welded blade in the centre there, a gladius made with just a plain twist, a couple of
Damascus blades on either side. And there you go. That piece of combined colonial and home smelted iron there, I cut it in half with an angle grinder, polished it and etched it. You can see the steely iron in the centre, which is the stuff we've smelted. The colonial wrought is the more stripy stuff, I think. Not being a metallurgist, I can only assume that is how it is. That extends, of course, the full width of that. So you've got a fair bit of it there, actually. It's the other side of the piece that you cut. That'll give you an idea of how it went together. So a steely iron like that would be very good mixed in with the other rough wrought. This was the principle of Damascus and pattern welding and all that, to mix different metals so you had the combined properties. So there's your combined metals together. I'll put some more of that homegrown bloom. I've just put it. Well, there we are. Oh, dear me. Modern life, you see. Aeroplanes, they never had to worry about that. Well, that's iron for you, as near as we can get it out here. I hope that will be of some help to you in your researches and reenactments. And if anyone wants to inquire, they're only too welcome to write to me. Post Office Box 487 Mudgee, New South Wales 2850. Drop me a line and I'll try and help you if I can. And good luck to you in any efforts in your iron smelting or pattern welding experiments. And thank you for looking at my little video. And I'll just wish you all far hail, was hail, be well, be strong, and may Odin and the gods, or whoever your god may be with you.